Because I suffered a brain injury after a car accident, I had to go to the eye hospital in Lausanne for various examinations, and from there I went to the neurology department in Lausanne. I was abused there for medical experiments, medication. I was raped, and that's how I got in.
There is more than one bad experience. One was when they went into my brain with a hollow needle right at the top of my spine, pulled out cerebrospinal fluid, and injected radioactivity. The second was when they did an electromusculogram through the left eye. That was in Basel. They stuck 2 needles through my left eye into the muscle and the nerve and used electric shocks to see what would happen.
I was raped there together with another woman. We were taken out of our beds at night in the hospital and taken to underground corridors. I became pregnant. I don't know what happened to the other woman. We tried to talk to doctors, nurses, lawyers, pastors, priests, the police. They didn't believe us. It's not possible, they said. I think if you do these experiments with medications, if you do experiments with electric shocks, with a brain puncture, which you don't usually do, then that material must already be available. It must have already been there when I was abducted into underground passages the second time, when the baby was due to be born, and I brought the child into the world under torture. There must have been something there. You can't just do that with nothing.
As to what happened to my child, they let it live for a few days and then they threw it against the wall in front of my eyes. They beat up the one man who was there and didn't want that, and me too, and abused me so badly that we were left lying there more dead than alive. They left us there, I don't know how long, for 2 days. And then they made this child into sausage in front of me. Later, I came into a room. There was only a trestle standing diagonally, no daylight, a naked light bulb above me, no handle on the door, and I was kept there for between 3 and 4 weeks.
Now, if you ask me what kind of people do things like that, I don't know. They didn't introduce themselves. I once said they were Satanists, but a priest friend of mine told me, no, that's a human. Humans are capable of such things. It depends on who he devotes himself to. I think these things they did are satanic. Nevertheless, I think it's also possible for people to degenerate like that. Have I ever filed a criminal complaint? No, nobody believed me. After this first experience, which lasted almost 3 months in double quarantine with another woman, I had tried to talk. I didn't have any documents. My fiancé, who worked in care, had them. He was Basque, a Spaniard. He wanted to go to Spain to get the papers. He never came back. He was shot dead. I don't know by whom. I only found out later. He said, I will be the father of your child. I was 5 months pregnant when I went to visit someone in the hospital, as I had gotten outside in the meantime, who pulled me into a corner and told me that they had shot Mario. I ran away after that for hours, then sat down somewhere and I had to say yes to my child. I had hoped it would be a girl because I thought I might see the rapist in a boy, in his face. But I had to make a decision, and I said a very conscious yes, and said, I want you, whether you're a girl or a boy. My name as a girl is Andrea Florina, as a boy, Andrea Stefan. I didn't have to hate, although I still have a rage sometimes, that's for sure. After this experiment with radioactivity, I think it was grace. It was given to me from above. I was lying alone in a room, feeling really awful, and I said to myself, they've done to me what you, God, have forbidden. I will never be the same person again. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I think this sentence saved me from hatred, and I think it was grace or mercy that I received it. I'm not sure I said this in full consciousness back then in that state.
Now, to answer your question, would you recognize the crime scene? Yes, I went there in 2007. I was there with a friend to look, after 29 years in Lausanne. I wanted to know if what I am saying is true, or do I have a psychiatric illness? I found the barrack we were in because the hospital was being rebuilt. We were in the underground corridors. And I also found the place where I was as a child. The Lausanne University Hospital is on a hill. There are 25 different buildings, with a difference in altitude of probably 100 meters, and they are connected by underground passageways. It took me a long time to realize that it was true, until a friend told me that under the old Roche, headquarters of the pharmaceutical company Roche, there are 7 underground levels. The 6th is with operating rooms, and the 7th is with trucks and everything. That's when I knew it was real. Because, I had stopped believing myself because everyone was saying, I don't believe you. I had from the beginning. I hadn't dissociated. I always experienced it one-to-one. I tried to talk right from the start. But whatever I said and whoever I said it to, they said, we'll send you to the psychiatric ward, and there we'll take you apart.
And I knew that I didn't want to go to a psychiatric ward. I've never been in a psychiatric ward, not even for a day. I clearly wanted it that way. I had repressed the baby thing at some point because I had these pictures of this mutilated child where there was simply nothing left, except for one detail. But I don't want to tell you that. Not everyone needs to know that. It's gruesome enough. I just had to suppress it in order to move on. I didn't talk about it with my parents, not even with my mother, but I'm sure she knew because she sometimes made comments. And even if I wasn't fully aware of it, it was there in my subconscious because I reacted accordingly.
Now, to answer your next question, how have you processed your experiences up until now? Honestly, I'm doing better now, but sometimes it's difficult. Because of what they did, I'm very disabled. I've had pain from head to toe ever since. They broke my back, they broke my eyes, my ears. I have a lot of allergies. I've had seizures, but I can't take painkillers. Depending on the situation, it's difficult to deal with. But I read a sentence by Rachel Hannon, who was in a concentration camp. It's a very important sentence for me. She wrote, "At night I dream of Mangala. During the day I believe in forgiveness." I told an ear doctor friend of mine 2 days ago, I have to fight for forgiveness again and again every day. I can forgive what they did, but certain actions are unforgivable.
Finally, do I have a personal concern or message? Yes, I have a concern. That victims have the courage to talk. Admittedly, you have to revisit these things. They are very present then, but it still sets you free. That victims learn to overcome the shame of having been victimized. I am one of those victims who did not become a perpetrator, but that these victims who have been turned into perpetrators forgive themselves for becoming perpetrators.
When people first hear that I'm a cult torture survivor, some of the torture that I went through, the mind control, the trafficking, they often assumed that that meant that I grew up in like a compound or really isolated, but I did not. I grew up in a busy city in Toronto. My parents sent me to public schools, but they made sure that there was always at least one cult adult who was part of the school. They sent me to extracurricular activities, or they took me and stayed, but there was always, again, either an adult or they were there. Like skating, where they dressed me in really skimpy outfits that my abusers got off on, and swimming. They sent me to brownies and Girl Guides and CGIT, but there was always a cult adult there who would report back on me if my parents weren't there. And I was kept somewhat isolated in terms of who I could interact with. And I was also kept isolated from popular media. Like, my parents only allowed me to watch Sesame Street, Mr. Dress-Up, Polka Dot Door, even when I was like 12, 13, 14, until I disclosed the child sexual abuse. That was the first step to me remembering of a great uncle. And when I disclosed that at school by writing a story, and then that meant that the police and the children's aid, or like in the US, Children's Protective Services got involved. When that happened, they started changing it, and I was allowed to watch a little bit more TV. But like, I was shut off from a lot of popular media. There were kids at school who would be like singing pop songs, and I didn't know what they were, or were talking about actors, or celebrities that I had no idea what they were talking about because I was kept so isolated in that way. But I had access to books, and books were like a lifeline for me, helping me imagine and believe that there were good people in the world, or that good things could happen, or helping me feel less alone in my trauma and pain. But I could not have survived the torture without the dissociative identity. Like, I needed those splits, as well as the cult intentionally made those splits. But I grew up in Toronto. It was not in a compound. It was not isolated in the way people often assume. And my parents and other cult abusers mask so well, and they look so good in society. My parents had good paying jobs, where it looked respectable, went to church every weekend, volunteered in so many different ways, and knew somewhat of the right things to say. But they don't have compassion and empathy. They lack compassion and empathy. They can mask it a little bit, and they can say some of the right things, but if you really pay attention to your gut and to body language, you might be able to tell something is off, and yet people would still not know about the cult torture, the torture that was happening every day and every night at home, and when they took me to places for the cult and for the trafficking. It can be happening to someone you know. It can be happening in your community so easily. There are so many cult torture survivors where the abusers and the family look normal, with a good facade, good masks. Please believe survivors. Please hear survivors. The ways that people could have figured it out more were looking at all the signs of child abuse and torture and cult torture that I showed. There are so many things that the cults that tortured me from baby onward and trafficked me that they used in the torture and the sexual assault and the mind control to give us negative associations or to set off cues, so triggers for the mind control, that other people would see as innocuous or even a sacred thing or a healing thing. That for so many of us cult torture survivors, we are either going to have a trigger to, like, also a cue that sets off mind control, but like a reaction to, a negative reaction, or we're going to be incredibly drawn to. So like tarot cards and the cycles of the moon and Christian religion and hymns and songs and children's nursery rhymes. Like, there are so many things that the cult used deliberately and intentionally to make it harder for us to navigate life every day out in society, and to have a way to constantly set off and reinforce mind control messages, the basic core messages, like don't remember, don't talk inside as well, with a dissociative identity between cult-created and self-created folks inside. Don't try to escape. There's so many, and it is so intentional. And sometimes it makes me so angry that there are so many ways to try and set off the don't remember, or like go back to the cult, or all the other programs that they set off, and how much of a struggle it can be to get through a day without triggers or cues for programming, or things that just take us back down into the memories that most people would never understand or even think of, and that so many things that are safe for other people can be triggers for us, or for some survivors, it can be a draw, but still on some level, it may be reminding them of the cult torture and or setting off programming. Cult is so incredibly calculated and diabolical. These were intergenerational, interconnected cults, including KKK, Satanic, Nazi, and Christian cults, among others, that my parents and other extended family and many other people were a part of. The cults that tortured and trafficked me from baby onward, they really enjoyed murder. And it was a way to keep us victims terrified that we would be next. There was the constant threat of that. But the kids and teens and adults that they were murdering, most of them were born from teen and adults, cult victims and cult members. And the babies were born early, kept healthy and well by the nurses and doctors, incubators, breathing tubes, all of that. But so they were born early, and they were kept unregistered in warehouses or other places where they were kept separate from the rest of society. Many of them were tortured, paired up with us kids, murdered, but not all of them were murdered, and some of them were kept to just birth more. But sometimes the cult would choose runaways, homeless people to kill. Not very often. I think there's more of a risk. Usually it was the unregistered babies and kids and adults that they chose as victims. But when they murdered, and they murdered frequently, it wasn't always human. Sometimes it was animals. And sometimes they would make sure that it was one of our pets or an animal that we were given to take care of in the cult, in the evenings, in the cult torture, and to protect. And then they murder the animal. And all of it, human and animal, was so traumatic, and intentionally trying to bond us with the cult, trauma bond, through teaching us that we were responsible for what happened, that we were a perpetrator, that we were a murderer. So therefore we were one of the cult, even though we were being forced to participate in any way or just witnessing. And then the forcing to consume. And all of it was messing with our minds. And there was a lot of mind control used and psychological manipulation. And it was all cruel with a complete disregard of life, because life is precious. And they also did some fake murders, where maybe some victims wouldn't be able to see the difference. They did usually drug us, and they did use elaborate props, but there is a huge difference between real murder and fake murder that you can tell on a sensory level, on multiple sensory levels, and even visually, once you have seen murder frequently in your life. So for me anyway, I could always see through. But it was another layer that they were trying to build on with the trauma and the manipulation. And it was all calculated and deliberate and cruel, and meant to keep us under the power of the cult, unable to escape and unable to talk about it and unable to look at our memories. So that the cult could continue all the trafficking and the child corn and the torture corn, which gained them so much money and power and influence and favors. And because they enjoyed it.
We would like to thank our channel members for continuously supporting our channel. We are praying for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in our next video.